So for this assignment, I got assigned the overhead squat assessment. The overhead squat assessment is a great tool to check for core stability, core strength, balance, dynamic flexibility, and neuromuscular control as a whole throughout the body. So from an athlete standpoint, it's easy to perform. All you're basically doing is just a squat with your arms over your head. And from an instructor standpoint, it's fairly easy as well. It just might take a few times, a few assessments to get comfortable and confident with picking out imbalances and errors that some athletes might have in their form. So if you're an instructor, you would tell the athlete, get in a stance that have your feet shoulder width apart. You're going to have your arms above your head. Try to keep your arms even with your ears, or just as far up as you can if you're not that flexible to do so. And then the instructor would simply just tell the athlete to squat, and they would perform a few reps. I've also done it before and seen it done with a bar or a towel that you would have above your head. While you do it, there's no right or wrong way. It's just kind of, sometimes it's easier to see imbalances from the shoulder region if you have the athlete hold onto a bar or a towel. Again, no right or wrong way, just kind of up to the instructor or the athlete depending on what they want to do. So like I said, from the instructor standpoint, tell the athlete to get in a stance with the feet shoulder width apart, hands straight above their head, keep the elbows locked, and then you would simply just tell them to squat. And proper depth is when to just tell them to, like, you're sitting in a chair about that depth. It's important in this instance for the instructor to not really give them much information about the test. So less is more for this for sure. So for example, you wouldn't want to tell an athlete, okay, you're going to squat and you're going to keep your knees, try to keep your knees in line with your toes as you go down. You don't want to say that because you want an athlete to do what is natural for them in their body, what their natural movement is. And if you give those little cues, they might try to follow those cues, whereas that might not be their natural movement. And like I said, this test is used to point out imbalances. So if the athlete has imbalances, you want those imbalances to show. So all I would simply tell an athlete is all you're going to do is you're going to squat and you're going to try to keep your hands above your head the whole time. And if an athlete didn't know how to squat, I would simply tell them to start with your hands above your head and just pretend like you're sitting back in a chair. And once you feel like you've gone proper depth of a chair, stand back up. So in that way, it just tells, it doesn't give the athlete any ideas, and it just kind of clears their mind and lets them do what comes natural for them. So as an instructor, you're going to want to monitor 5 squats from an anterior point of view, 5 from a lateral point of view, and 5 from a posterior point of view. Sometimes the posterior point of view isn't included, but just to be extensive, we're going to include that today. So again, 5 from an anterior, 5 from a lateral, and 5 from a posterior. So the areas of the body that you're going to want to monitor, if you're the instructor, would be the ankle, the knee, the lumbopelvic hip complex, and the shoulder and neck region. So from an anterior point of view, in an ideal world, the athlete, when they squat and then eccentric phase, their knees would be right over their toes, right in a straight line. They wouldn't be coming in or out. So like I said, that's in an ideal world, but a couple of common things that happen are when the athlete goes down, their feet will turn out, or their knees will cave in or go out. So again, those are 3 things to look for from an anterior point of view. When you have the athlete squat from a lateral point of view, a couple of things that will happen is when the hands are overhead and they squat, they'll have excessive forward movement of their arms. So you want to watch for that, number 1. Also, a couple of common things that happen in the lumbopelvic hip complex is there'll be extensive forward leaning. The low back might arch and the low back might round. Also, a couple of things that happen in the shoulder region are elevation of the shoulders or excessive forward head movement. So again, things to watch from the lateral perspective. From a posterior viewpoint, 2 things can happen here. Either the feet can slightly evert or flatten, and then when you squat, you can have maybe a couple imbalances where you're either twisting or you're leaning a little bit to one side or the other. So like I said, those are areas to look for and imbalances and movements to watch out for. So before I recorded this, I recorded myself doing the overhead squat, and I picked out a few imbalances that I have. So in a second here, I'm just going to perform 2 squats from an anterior, lateral, and posterior point of view, and then hopefully you guys will find the same imbalances that I found. Like I said, if you're in the instructor, you'd have the athletes perform 5 squats in each when you're looking at each direction, just so that you can monitor each region of the body and really get a good idea of what's happening there. Alright, so here we go from an anterior point of view. Again, just my normal squat. I know I have imbalances. Figure those out. And then lastly, from a posterior view. Alright, so obviously not perfect by any means, but again, that's kind of the point, is you want to do the movement to the best of your ability, and then if you have imbalances, that's what the test is made to point out. So, from an anterior point of view, again, I found out that when I descended into the squat, my knees caved in. So what that says is that I have overactive adductors and underactive abductors. So like I said, there's a chart on the NASM website and in the book that, for example, so for my movement when my knees caved in, it'll have that movement, and then it'll also have the overactive muscles and underactive muscles. So so for me, I would go in and I would look, and it would show that I have overactive adductors and underactive abductors. So what that tells me as an athlete, or me as an instructor, is that the athlete needs to strengthen those abductor muscles and maybe stretch so you can loosen a little bit those adductor muscles. So that's the only balance I found from an anterior point of view. From a lateral point of view, when I squatted, the first thing I noticed is that when I came down, I had excessive forward movement of my arms. And so in an ideal world, when an athlete would go into their squat, if you were to draw a line from their tibia coming up and from their arms coming up, they would be parallel, but obviously mine aren't. So like I said, in an ideal world, line from the tibia to the arm would be parallel. So again, I saw that I had excessive forward movement of my arms. I saw I had excessive forward leaning from my lumbopelvic hip complex, and I saw that my lower back also rounded. So basically what that tells me is that since my arms had excessive forward movement, I have overactive pecs and lats, so I should stretch those, and it shows me that I have underactive middle and lower trap. So work on strengthening those. Since I had excessive forward lean, that means that my calf muscles, so my soleus and gastrocnemius, are overactive, and my tibialis anterior is underactive, so I need to work on strengthening my tibialis anterior. And since I have my lower back rounds, that means that my hamstrings are overactive, so I need to work on stretching those, and it shows that my gluteus maximus is underactive, so I need to work on strengthening that. So those are all I found from the lateral. And from a posterior view, I saw that when I squatted, my feet flattened, so I had slight ankle eversion. And I did notice that I kind of turned / dipped to the left a little bit, so I noticed that as well. So like I said, those are all the imbalances that I found, and again, it's very useful because, again, the major pro of this test is that I can now go and look at the chart, again, found on NASM or in the book, and I can look and see what movements I had, what imbalances I had, what muscles are overactive, what muscles are underactive. And from an instructor standpoint, very useful because, like, for example, my inward movement of my knee, I then know by looking at the chart and doing this assessment that my abductors are weak and underactive, and that I need to do some abductor strengthening exercises to get that athlete's knee problem fixed and get that imbalance fixed. A con, not really any con, just maybe if you're an athlete and you've never had this done and you get it done and you didn't think you had any imbalances, but it turns out you have a bunch. That would maybe be a con, but no physical con. And again, the main pro is it just helps point out imbalances and then gives you a good idea if you're programming for an athlete how to fix those imbalances. All right, thanks guys.